This episode of All Things Reconsidered is supported by Parrhesia, freedom of speech, the act of speaking with boldness and courage. Visit peterboghossian.com to learn more.
I'm Peter Boghossian. Welcome to the second episode of All Things Reconsidered, where we consider what in the world happened to NPR. If you missed the first episode, you can find a link in the description. Today, Matt Thornton and I sit down to analyze two NPR stories. Matt is a fifth-degree black belt in jiu-jitsu, coach, owner of Straight Blast Gym, and author of The Gift of Violence. Matt and I reconsider two NPR stories. One is about Professor Harassment, which I happen to know a lot about. The other concerns Elon Musk, and most importantly, the dangers of free speech. Also, former public media journalist Gina Gambony joins us again for Morning Sedition. But first, we'll kick off the show with comments from former NPR listeners about why they stopped listening and supporting NPR.
Welcome to another segment of I Stopped Listening to NPR When. Today we have Susan, Adam, and Scott, and they are going to provide their testimonials for when they stopped listening to NPR. First up is Susan. Let's see what she has to say.
This is my story about leaving NPR and specifically about leaving This American Life. I've been a huge NPR listener for decades. I listened to stations wherever I've lived. I would get up in the morning, have it on while I was getting ready to go to work. I'd listen to it in the car. I'd listen to it on my way home from work. I would listen to it on the weekends. I truly enjoyed listening to all the different programs and even the weekend programs, and felt like I learned so much of what I knew about what was going on in the world from NPR. So towards the end of my time listening, the last, say, 5 years, I started noticing that it was just going downhill, turning into a lecture. But what really turned me off at the very end was, when I decided I couldn't listen anymore, was there was a show right after the 2016 election when Trump was voted in. And it was a really raw time for everybody. People were shocked, as was I, just wondering what was going to happen. People were super upset. People were telling friends on Facebook to defriend them if they voted for Trump. And, just emotions were just so high. And they did a show on This American Life where they interviewed a bunch of people in New York City about it. And it started off promising. And I thought, wow, they're really just going to talk to all different kinds of people. But then towards the end, they talked to this Muslim woman who lived in New York, and she was very fearful for the future, fearful for herself personally as a Muslim woman. And, it seemed like she didn't really have a good reason except for that her sisters were fearful and her aunts were fearful. So they were, afraid, I guess, that they were going to be attacked or something. And so she was somewhere near Times Square, and she looked out her door, or looked out a window, or was standing there and saw, I think, a group of white guys with Trump hats on.
After walking through Times Square in New York, 4 guys walked past her, probably on their way to the Trump victory party, which wasn't that far away. They were wearing red Make America Great Again caps. She had never seen groups of Trump supporters together like that.
And that was it. The story didn't go anywhere. They didn't even look at her or engage with her or say anything to her. There was nothing about what they said or did that it made it a story, except she saw them. And it was just stoking fear. And there was already so much fear. And then I think of like a month or so later, there was a story that appeared on the news about a girl who'd been attacked on a bus, I believe, or in the subway. A young girl, I think she said some white boys pulled her hijab or something like that. And there was a lot of alarm and a lot of I told you so's. And then it turned out that story was not true at all. She was out at night and she wasn't supposed to be. And she made up this story to tell to her parents so they wouldn't know she was out when she wasn't supposed to be. And I just feel like, why would a news organization or a beloved media organization with people who put their heart and soul in this thing, like Ira Glass, that I looked up to. It was like having a hero just sort of fall in front of my eyes. And still haven't been able to go back. Every now and again, I'll try to listen and I just hear more of that same type of angle, and just, I can't watch anymore. It's been incredibly disappointing. Thanks.
Wow.
It's a really interesting one.
Wow, that's fantastic. Wow.
Yeah. The first thing that strikes me, and this has been the case with I think most everybody that we've heard from that has stopped listening to NPR for one reason or another, is these are not conservatives.
Correct.
She is not a conservative. She's clearly of the left. And she's disappointed. And she's disappointed because she's looking to be informed, and instead she's being lectured. And then ultimately those lectures turn into fear-mongering. And she's obviously a smart woman, and she can figure out when it's just fear-mongering over nothing.
Yeah, and she's not just disappointed in NPR. She's disappointed in people she used to look up to.
Yeah, people that
she used to trust.
She trusted
as reliable sources of information have let her down.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things, too, is if you start with a conclusion and work your way backwards, which is what NPR is doing with their pushing their narrative, you are setting yourself up for you're credulous, and you're setting yourself up for like the Jussie Smollett situations.
Right.
And we saw what happened with Jussie Smollett and the legacy media on a story which the first time anybody heard the Jussie Smollett story, you'd be thinking, what?
That's exactly what I thought.
And they swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. And we see this happen over and over again. Wilfred Riley,
he's
the
great.
professor, has written about this, but it happens over and over again. Part of the reason it happens is
Hate
because
Crimes Hoax was his book.
Yeah, it's a great book. But these people in NPR and at these legacy media sources, they're starting from a conclusion, and then they're seeing the world that way. And so they're misinforming people, and she's absolutely correct about that.
Yeah, that was lovely. Okay, let's take a listen to Adam.
So I used to be a social studies teacher, and I used to trust NPR for some of the better news coverage around. When Trump was elected in 2016, I immediately started donating to NPR, Planned Parenthood, and the ACLU. When I stopped listening to NPR was when they covered the James Damore memo at Google. James Damore was fired for giving, I guess, an unacceptable yet honest take on possibly why you do not see 50-50 men and women in STEM fields. There might be different interests. Men and women might tend to have different interests, and therefore may not necessarily all choose to go into the same professions. Now, when I heard NPR's coverage of this, they had a panel of 4 or 5 people that all gave their own take on why Google was right to fire James Damore for creating a hostile work environment by promoting sexism and misogyny. They did not accurately in any way, shape, or form represent what he had written. There was nobody who was a contrary voice. It was just it was a show trial, just like we had back in the Stalinist days. So, and it's only gotten worse since then. But for me, that was a shock because I always considered NPR to be a really good and honest news agency. And that was just blatantly dishonest. They were lying. They're no longer a news agency. They're a propaganda agency. So that's when I first stopped listening to and donating to NPR.
Wow, another great one.
Yeah, obviously not a conservative. He's
That's
just
the first thing
looking
I was
for
thinking of.
honest news. He knew a little bit about this topic. In this case, it sounds like he read the Damore memo, and I would encourage anybody who's out there to read it themselves. Yeah. And if you can, there's some ones that are dishonest, not the actual memo that leftists have put out, but if you find the actual memo itself, there's nothing very controversial.
People have edited that.
There's people who have edited it, but there's nothing controversial in it, and he knew that, and so the gig was up for him. You pull the mask off, and you realize that you're being lied to.
Yes, take a look at some of the words he used: trust, good, honest, to blatantly dishonest propaganda, which is exactly what it is. If you'd like, I did an event with James Damore at Portland State. You can find that on YouTube. We'll put a link in the description. All right, here is Kay Scott. This is a brief one. Let's take a listen.
In brief, I stopped listening to NPR when I realized that they had an uber classy, charming, quote, professional, end quote, way of being just as extremist as, say, Fox News.
Yeah, we talked about this before, and that's why it's so dangerous. And in fairness to Fox News is a channel where you have Brett Baer's news report, actually, which I think is one of the most unbiased news reports out there. And then you have somebody like Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity is a far-right conservative. He doesn't make any... He doesn't hide that fact at all. So in that sense, it's honest.
In fact, not only does he not hide it, he's constantly...
Well, he says it over and over again. So he's honest, and you can go... If you want to know what that point of view is, you can go listen to that. The problem with NPR is they're not honest.
And now we'll hear from another person who grew tired of NPR's ideological lens, award-winning journalist, producer, and former host at NPR affiliate stations, Gina Gambony. She's back with Morning Sedition.
If you're watching or listening to this, you might already know that NPR News has deteriorated significantly. Today, I'll tell you why on Morning Sedition. Well, the truth is, I can't tell you all the reasons NPR News and content in general has deteriorated, but I'll offer two. NPR's commitment to diversity and inclusion. Now, diversity and inclusion sounds great. Diversity should mean different types of people with different ideas, approaches, and viewpoints, different experiences. Inclusion should mean widening the tent to fit all those people. What's wrong with that? Well, in the extreme ideology that's seeped into every aspect of NPR, that's not how either word is used. Instead, diversity means a collection of people of minority or oppressed status who are also left-wing. Inclusion means that diverse group is the only group that matters. If you platform non-diverse voices, especially voices of people who are centrist or, God forbid, lean right, the diverse group might be offended. Although I think they would be offended much less than NPR thinks they would. If someone in the diverse group is offended, they are not included anymore, because offending someone in a diverse group is tantamount to excluding them. So you have to make sure nobody says anything that may be offensive. In other words, you need to restrict speech. Inclusion ends up meaning restricted speech. Note, it does not matter if you offend someone who's not in the oppressed group. For instance, if you offend a white, cis, heterosexual male, those people don't matter. Every week, NPR offers an email to affiliate stations across the country called Source of the Week. It's a diverse sources database that gives public radio stations names and specialties of people who are not white to feature in interviews. Initially, this didn't bother me. In fact, I support the basic idea of interviewing people of different backgrounds. But I started to realize that the people NPR pushes forward in its weekly diverse sources email they're not necessarily the most qualified experts available, and nearly all of these experts share NPR's ideology. I also recognized the effect this database had on journalists at public radio stations. It sends the message that the way to measure the strength of an expert is by their race or ethnicity. If the person is not white, it's a good pick. I imagine the meeting where the idea of this database was hatched. I wonder if anyone said, hey, what if instead we create a database of the best experts we know, regardless of race or ethnicity, and send that out to member stations? But I'm confident no one said that, because they could be accused of bigotry if they said that. And I know everything I've said about this makes me sound like a bigot, but I'm not interested in baseless accusations. I'm interested in what's true and in journalistic integrity and public trust. Now, many NPR affiliate stations have been tracking the percentage of diverse sources they include in their local news departments. The main categories are, of course, race, ethnicity, sexuality, and sexual identity. Sometimes physical or developmental ability differences are included. Often regular gender is included, with favoritism to women, even though NPR programming has always been heavily populated by women. This kind of tracking isn't necessarily a bad idea. It's a good idea to chart who and what you're covering in a newsroom. But it becomes a bad idea when that's the only thing you're tracking, and it's the primary, if not the sole measure of how well your journalists are doing. Not accurate interpretation of data, not fervently scrutinizing one's own biases, not reporting on issues of substance that affect all communities in the public. No, just identity. The indispensable quality the diversity metric lacks is the diversity of viewpoints. In this kind of newsroom, nobody cares if you aren't representing the large portion of the public that doesn't agree with far-left ideology. In fact, if you do interview guests who are outside of the ideology or who question its core principles, you might find yourself a target for activist listeners and activist coworkers you mistakenly thought had some modicum of journalistic integrity. But that's a story for another day. For now, to all the people who didn't understand why so many stories from NPR and local public radio stations are about fringe left-wing issues and perspectives, now you have some idea.
That was Gina Gambony, award-winning journalist, producer, and former host at NPR affiliate stations. Thank you again, Gina, for joining us on All Things Reconsidered. And now it's time for Matt and I to reconsider the kind of content NPR broadcasts across the country every single day.
I know a lot about Professor Harassment. This next story is from NPR's All Things Considered. It deals with, among other things, Bruce Gilley, who is also at Portland State University. And full disclosure, I know Bruce very well, and we've become friendly as a result of what he's gone through. I think you'll find this story about right-wing and left-wing views of Professor Harassment quite interesting.
Well, this week, NPR is examining free speech in a digital age. Today, we look at college campuses. In the past 2 years, more than 250 university professors around the country have been the targets of cyber harassment campaigns. Some have lost their jobs. Others fear for their family's safety.
We already know the vast majority of these professors what happened. Joshua Katz from Princeton. We already know who wrote a piece in Quillette about the Black Student Union. We already critical of it. We already know why the vast majority of professors are being harassed, because they've said something that's not morally fashionable, that goes against the orthodoxy, particularly woke orthodoxy. Oh, we can look at that from the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, among other places.
Anya Kamenetz reports on how professors are pushing back against the cyber mobs.
You see my light flashing there. That's all the calls I've been getting.
You have 20 unheard messages.
Professor Albert Ponce teaches political science at Diablo Valley, a community college in California's East Bay. For the past few months, His answering machine has been filling up with threatening messages like these.
Albert Ponce, you are a piece of gutter slug that needs his neck snapped, okay? Call me if you need me. I'll do it for you. Race baity piece of trash.
It all started last October. Ponce was invited to give a public lecture on campus about his academic specialty, race and racism.
So we begin with the fact that we exist in a white supremacist, patriarchal...
Right there. Notice the first example they gave was somebody who is being harassed. And first, let me say, it's terrible that the guy's being harassed. It's terrible that people are doing that to him. He has every right to participate in the marketplace of ideas. I don't know if he's tenured or what his situation is, but this is unacceptable. We debate ideas. We have discourse about ideas. So let's put that in. But notice the first thing that they said in this story, the first is somebody who's promulgating the orthodoxy and other people who are leaving horrific messages for him, which is the slim minority of cases. Also, look how many words and how much time they devote to right-wing versus left-wing harassment.
So we begin with the fact that we exist in a white supremacist, patriarchal, heteronormative, capitalist system.
That's from an edited video of the talk, one that was circulated in various right-wing forums online. In the speech, Ponce said there was a white supremacist in the White House and that Thomas Jefferson raped many of his slaves. In today's highly polarized political climate, academics get attacked routinely when they bring up race or diversity. There are examples across the country. After he tweeted, "All I want for Christmas is white genocide."
Think about that. All I want for Christmas is white genocide. So we've crossed beyond from
a little bit extreme.
Yeah, it is a bit extreme. I would say that he has, to say the least, I would say that he certainly has a right to do that.
Sure.
And he has protected speech. I think advocating for mass murder of people on the basis of their race, like if someone said, all I want for Christmas is black genocide, of course, the answer to that is that it doesn't comport with the power dynamics, and that's why you can only be racist one way up. That's why they've had to redefine racism. But all I want for Christmas is a white genocide. Okay.
George Ciccarello-Marr was placed on leave from Drexel University in Pennsylvania. At Brooklyn College, Laurie Rubel published a National Science Foundation-funded research paper about how math teachers in segregated urban schools can address equity.
Okay, again, the vast majority of time, all these examples, these are fringe cases. These are very small cases in relation to the total number of people who have been harassed, such as myself.
The on-air take of Fox News commentator Greg Gutfeld was...
A math professor at Brooklyn College claims that...
Remember, for NPR, Fox is always the enemy.
That merit-based education, meaning rewards linked to hard work and talent, is a tool of evil whiteness.
The right doesn't have a monopoly on...
Okay. Do you want to... I mean,
Greg has taken a satirical look at something ridiculous that was said. I don't think anything's wrong with that. Obviously, nobody's advocating for violence except for the professor that wants a white genocide. I suppose that may go against Twitter standards, you would think, but I don't know.
He won't be banned if he's even on Twitter.
Monopoly on these attacks. Colleges like UC Berkeley, the home of the free speech movement, have erupted with violent responses to conservative speakers. And professors have sometimes been subject to equally intense harassment from the left, as well as the right. Bruce Gilley at Portland State University published a paper in an academic journal last fall titled The Case for Colonialism.
There is a wealth of evidence, in particular that's come out in the last 10 years, that shows quite overwhelmingly positive benefits in terms of democracy, in terms of public health, in terms of human rights.
The paper incited liberal outrage.
I had never experienced that kind of mass global mob.
I just want to say, this is a finer point on this, but I don't like how the word liberal is just tossed around. I would say I don't know what the word in that sense would be.
Liberal and mob doesn't really go together, does it?
Yeah, I don't like how the term is tossed out. Now, it's also interesting that they chose that particular example, The Case for Colonialism, which is a really interesting paper. I don't know if you've read it or not, but that they know that NPR listeners would find particularly distasteful.
I took fright, frankly.
The article was withdrawn after threats of violence against Gilly and the editor of the journal that published it, Third World Quarterly.
Third World Quarterly, yeah. So I want to talk about that for a second. The rules of engagement have changed. The rules of engagement used to be someone publishes an article, and if you don't like it, you publish a response to that, preferably in the same journal, but it doesn't have to be. Now, the rules of engagement, if you don't like an idea, you threaten to murder the journal editor. You threaten to kill Bruce Gilly. Oh, and they also file Title IX investigations against Bruce Gilly. That's the other thing. These offices have been weaponized. So I think it's really good that they did have Gilly on. I would have loved to see him. I would have loved to see the implications of that and have him discuss that more, but kudos to them for having Gilly on.
There is a difference in patterns of online harassment between the right and the left. On the left, threats tend to originate from within campus communities. Thousands of self-identified academics, for example, signed online petitions calling for Gilly's article to be retracted. On the right, there's an entire network of groups like Professor Watchlist.
Yeah, not only for his article to be retracted, for his tenure to be revoked, for his position to be taken away from him, for his doctorate to be taken away from him.
What was the outcome? Did he lose his job?
No, he's at PSU, and they go after him constantly. In fact, he's one of the most published people. These are objective metrics. You can go to Google Scholar. You can punch in Bruce Gilly. He put forth a conservative, even Berkeley has a conservative class in conservative political philosophy. His class in conservative political thought was rejected because it didn't have enough diversity. And instead of saying, oh yeah, we'll put, why don't you put Thomas Sewell in or Larry Elder? But that's not what they want for diversity. But instead of saying we don't want our kids to learn about this because we think it's hateful, that would at least be more honest, right? You could disagree with someone, but they'd be honest with you. So they've gone after him. He's now the most hated man at Portland State University currently.
Or self-described alt-right media collective, the Red Elephants. They posted a video in December about Albert Ponce, attacking what they called
Marxist, communist, disgusting rhetoric that they spew in these classrooms to indoctrinate these children.
They used it to kick off an initiative called Film Your Marxist Professors. Meanwhile, websites Campus Reform and the College Fix pay students to report from classrooms. These tales spread to alt-right media sites like Stormfront and Breitbart.
Okay, so there are multiple things going on here. The obsession with what the right is doing as opposed to the fact that the overwhelming majority of this is from the left. The other thing that's going on is, I think it's actually a really interesting question. Should students be allowed to post criticism and commentary, or actually just what their professors are saying and post it online? I think it's a really interesting question. Maybe it'd be a nice second segment.
And to mainstream outlets like Fox News, the New York Post, even CNN, while self-identified trolls uncover and post people's personal information and concoct false accusations. But some of the academics are fighting back. Albert Ponce's faculty senate is drafting a resolution that he hopes will be adopted by the District Board of Governors to make clear that the colleges will stand behind scholars with provocative beliefs.
Yeah, provocative beliefs if they're on the left. They're more than happy to. It's not even the left. It's not tradition. It's that comports with critical social justice ideology. In fact, there's something at Portland State that the video, the National Association of Scholars had to take down the video. They talked about criticism of critical race scholarship being itself a form of racism and discrimination. It's a really dishonest portrayal of what the situation is, both numerically and what kind of speech they're talking about.
We can't just say anything because we are professors. Producing academic research, we're able to make claims, maybe provocative, very provocative.
But you can say anything.
Should be able to say anything.
Yeah, you can say anything you want.
To many, but we ground it and we back it up with evidence.
Yeah, evidence that's in journals that's been laundered, idea laundered.
He is resolute, but the harassment is taking a toll on him and his family.
But the thing that's most troubling is, the real threats and against my family. And that's when, the doxing of, pictures on the web and of my 9-year-old daughter.
They are afraid for their lives.
All it takes is one.
He and his wife try not to park their cars in the same places every day, and they scan the street from the window at night.
What have you told your daughter? Anything?
No, not yet. We're trying to shield her as much as possible.
Anya Kamenetz, NPR News.
So if you just listened to this and you weren't familiar with it, what would you think about where is this problem coming from? Who would you think that this affected the most?
Leftist professors who are talking about quote unquote controversial views.
Right. And you know who this really affects the most? Exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
And the idea is that you would frame this in terms of a free speech thing with leftist professors who are, against racism, and there are all these racists out there who somehow in cahoots. It's just not. Again, I understand that NPR doesn't like facts and evidence and data. I get it. That's just a dishonest portrayal of the situation. And even if you look at the number of people who have resigned, they're overwhelmingly, increasingly they're becoming liberal, but they're resigning for reasons that they can't teach in environments that are completely woke, and they can't even teach the integrity of their disciplines.
Right. And no one supports violence and threats on the right or the left. Certainly,
no one should.
No one should. I mean, no one that should be taken seriously. Right. I don't support that. You don't support that.
Absolutely not.
Which is why it's somewhat disturbing that NPR, in the episode we listened to not too long ago, had somebody on from Antifa who does support the use of violence.
Correct.
So I find it a little hypocritical that they're talking about somebody who's receiving threats of violence while at the same time promoting an organization that traffics in threats and violence. So it's hard for me to take NPR seriously on this topic.
Yeah, and I guess it really is unfortunate that if you trust a source, you get on in the car and you're listening to this, and you've just heard some background noise, some chatter about free speech on college campuses, and you listen to this, you really would think that this is overwhelmingly a problem with people who are anti-racist or what have you. When the fact of the matter is that's just simply not true. It's opposite land.
Right, it is.
We have to end this segment with an image that NPR posted on its website that goes along with the story. Life cycle of a cyber harassment campaign. 1. Professor Lori Rubel publishes a paper online. 2. College student writes a story about it on campus reform. 3. Rubel is attacked on alt-right and neo-Nazi websites. Everybody's a neo-Nazi, and if you disagree with her, you have to be with her ideas, you have to be a neo-Nazi. And on 2 different shows on Fox News, remember, NPR has set itself up as against Fox News. Even if Fox News said 2 + 2 = 4, I picked that example on purpose, it could not possibly be true. 5. Individuals attack her on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, etc. Love the Pac-Man graphics. And over email, U.S. mail, and phone, etc. With each new story, the cycle starts up again. My goodness, what a image that is almost completely divorced from reality and has it ass backward. Okay, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. If you put stupid shit on the internet, people are going to respond to it. That does not mean that they're neo-Nazis. That does actually not mean anything. You can criticize somebody's idea, and particularly a professor who's putting their ideas out there. Criticism of those ideas are not the same as a criticism of a person. The other thing about this graphic that's grossly misrepresented is that it makes it appear as that someone on the left put something out and then there's this wide-scale attack on the right, when in fact it's almost exactly the opposite. It's not saying this doesn't happen, but in terms of the incidents that happen, you can look at the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. On campuses, this is by the left. So somebody will say something and then the left will savage them, and the erosion of academic freedom of speech comes that way, and personal attacks come from that. And finally, it is very interesting that Professor Rubel blocked both my co-host Matt Thornton and myself on Twitter. I've had no interaction with her as far as I know. Nope. Okay. Free speech has come under attack by the extreme left, and of course, NPR has followed. In this clip, an NPR journalist interviews an internet law expert about Elon Musk and free speech. The clip is from April 15th of this year, 2022. Let's take a listen.
Twitter is a global platform. It has hundreds of millions of active users. So what does it mean now that the world's richest person wants to buy it while saying it's all about free speech? Kate Klonick joins me now to discuss. She's an assistant law professor at St. John's University in New York, and she focuses on private governance of online speech. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, so already we have a problem.
She's picked someone who focuses on governance of free speech rather than a free speech advocate to play the part of a free speech advocate. Yeah,
correct.
Pretty apparent, right?
Why not ask a free speech advocate? So, I just read Andrew Doyle's book on free speech. It was excellent. Why not ask Michael Shermer? If you don't want public intellectuals, if you want maybe someone who's more academic, that's fine too. I mean, why is she picking somebody who's not an advocate for free speech? Okay, let's take a listen.
So, Professor Klonick, assuming Musk follows through with his effort to buy Twitter, what would it mean if one wealthy person could buy a platform with this kind of reach and essentially say, it's mine and I make the rules?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question because, of course, there are platforms like that that are owned technically by one person already, and their boards, and so there'd still be some structure in place for this to be checked. But I think that we're seeing what this moment is really showing us for a lot of people is that these private platforms that govern our public speech rights are really susceptible to the power of capitalism and just being the fault lines.
Yet another boogeyman
that we expect to exist are being exposed.
So Elon Musk calls himself a, quote, free speech absolutist. He also has said he'll unlock Twitter's potential and allow all legal speech. So what do free speech advocates make of what he's saying?
We could ask a free speech advocate.
Why don't we ask a free speech advocate?
Let's see what she says.
That would be really interesting. Why don't we do that?
It'd be interesting.
Yeah, the concept of unlocking Twitter and allowing all legal speech on the platform is really complicated. For something to be
really, is it that is it really that complicated? Oh, I don't know. Maybe it is.
For something to be legal is actually a very difficult thing and to assess, and it's difficult between jurisdictions. And so one of the problems with what Musk is describing is in the United States, for instance, to allow all legal speech technically allowed under the First Amendment onto the platform, you would have to allow all spam to stay up on the platform. You would have to allow all pornography to stay up on the platform.
Okay, so we can so listen to what. So NPR does this all the time. They make connections to sully concepts. Listen to what she does.
All forms of hate speech. That's all First Amendment protected speech. And so all of that would stay up, at least within the U.S. It could make the platform functionally unusable.
I mean, this is a big discussion we're having in society right now about what is censorship and what is free speech, what's dangerous for society. And the platform has blocked users temporarily or permanently over controversial or hateful speech. The most prominent example being Donald Trump. Twitter kicked him off for violating a rule about glorifying violence after the 2021 Capitol attack. Would a platform owned by Elon Musk open the door again for speech that is being taken down and seen as dangerous?
It could potentially do that if he is able to go through with this, but this is something.
I just want to say, I just think it's so important to talk about this idea of the sullying of concepts, of the merging of one concept together with another concept. So
we could talk about this particular example using Donald Trump. I don't think I'll play the role of free speech advocate because there is none on this episode that she's talking to. The problem wasn't that Donald Trump was kicked off. The problem is because you kicked Donald Trump off and you still have tons of accounts like Antifa accounts where they're actually planning riots. I repost often and go through some of the.
Right. You also have the Hezbollah on there. You also have the Iranian Revolutionary Guards.
They will plan and advocate for violence downtown Portland on Twitter, and Twitter will completely ignore that. So the problem, and the reason why a lot of people, myself included, were happy when Elon Musk talked about buying it. The problem isn't because I don't want pornography on Twitter. I don't want hate speech on Twitter. What I don't want to see happen is I don't want to see Twitter skewed to one ideological party and have violence and things from the left allowed and people who advocate from the right taken down. And that's what we've seen time and time again. Right. That's the conversation.
Right. And so it's a combination of, all men or women get you banned. Or no, men or women. I can't remember what it is.
If you say a man can't have children on Twitter, you can be banned.
Right. Okay. So there is a content issue, and then there's the issue of the fair application of standards.
Exactly.
None of those things came up. And again, that to me here is what's going on at a deeper level is that idea of sullying concepts. Republicans don't like critical race theory as if critical race theory, Republican issue, Republicans are bad, therefore you should like critical race theory. It's
people who want to support free speech like hate speech or want to see child porn online.
Yeah, child porn.
That's not what's going on.
Or they're all Nazis running around.
It's not the conversation.
There's Sieg Heiling in the Starbucks.
And there is a happy medium there where you can have a platform where there is no pornography and you also don't adjudicate based on political bias, which is what people would like, especially when you have, I give you a very solid example of this was what happened with the Hunter Biden laptop.
Oh, yeah.
So the laptop came out, the New York Post wrote about it, and the New York Post was banned from Twitter before the election. That certainly had, when all our media in unison, the mainstream media said, oh, it's Russian propaganda, it's this and that, that certainly had an effect on the election. And now we know it's not Russian propaganda, it's Hunter Biden's laptop. The New York Post was right. But that definitely would not have happened if that laptop belonged to Trump. You know that, I know 100%. That, we all know that. That's the problem. That infuriates people because it's not fair. Even if, like me, you're not somebody who was a Trump fan or would have voted for Trump.
Same as
I
me.
understand that's not fair, and I understand it's dangerous for the country, and that's what the conversation's about, and they're not even alluding to that.
Correct.
They want to mix it all up and pretend like people who are into free speech want to see pornography online.
Yeah, and they want to just start goose-stepping everywhere. It's insane.
There's people on the left like Bill Maher who pointed this out as well. And I saw an interview he did not too long ago where he had the old leader for the ACLU on, and he talked about how the ACLU no longer advocates for that kind of free speech.
It's changing. I mean, it was a stalwart defender of free speech and civil liberties. Is it still that?
Not as much. I mean, they just produced a couple of years ago new guidelines for their lawyers to use when deciding what free speech cases to take. This is a requirement now for the national ACLU lawyers that before they take a case defending someone's free speech, they have to make sure that the speech doesn't offend or threaten other civil liberties values.
Yeah, and so even the ACLU, they would never allow Nazis to march in Skokie, Illinois anymore. Yeah.
This is something that, for those of us who have studied this for a while, and for people who have worked...
Those of us who have studied it for a while, we know... Let's take a concept. When you study something, you take a look at both sides of the issue. We know that she's not using the word study in any traditional way. She's looking at what are the arguments that support my position.
In this industry for the last 15 or 20 years, that there has always been these issues that have been lurking. I just think that they've been mostly invisible to the public. And so moments like Donald Trump being deplatformed or taken off Facebook and Twitter, and moments like this finally kind of expose to people that there are, like, who is in power to speak as freely as they think they.
We know exactly who's in power. We know exactly the kind of people who are exposed. And we know exactly what you can't say. We know the narratives. We know what is a blasphemy, and it's the exact opposite of what she's portraying.
It is.
Can or not speak. How fragile those rights are online.
The idea of banning people on Twitter, it's seen as censorship. On the other hand, we've seen people complain that hateful, problematic speech needs to be removed because it can lead to really dangerous moments. Is there a better way for Twitter and other platforms to...
Yeah, how about the fair application of standards?
Yeah, it could lead to dangerous moments like you might have a taxpayer-funded institution advocating for a terrorist group like Antifa.
moderate content and still respect democracy and free speech?
I think that these platforms, I know that people don't typically want to hear this, but a lot of these platforms are doing the best they can to try to splice that decision, which is a decision that is one of the hardest decisions for courts to make. And it is.
They're doing their best they can to do what? What are they?
I'm going to give her a little bit of slack on this one because there are issues as it relates to things that they have to censor. And I could see how that would be very difficult, right? But that's not the conversation. The conversation is about political bias.
That's correct. If that were really the case, then other hateful groups would be censored equally. You'd have a uniform, fair application of the standards of Twitter's own standards.
Now, she probably does not believe, and a lot of NPR listeners that are listening to this probably do not believe that institutions like Twitter and Google have a political bias. I would say that there's no arguing the fact that they have a political bias. I would say that there's lots of examples you could give, but at the very least, let someone on who can argue that point, because 100%. That is what the conversation is about. That's why people were happy that Elon Musk was going to buy Twitter. Not because Elon Musk is going to put Donald Trump back on or because he's going to put pornography on, but because they were hoping he would have some sense of fairness between political ideologies.
And the uniform application of standards to everyone independent of the positions they espouse.
And I find it interesting how much that terrifies them.
I also find it interesting that they didn't even talk about it.
No.
One of the hardest decisions for these platforms to make. And so I think that this line between censorship and hate speech is much, much more difficult to assess at scale than people understand. And so this is also kind of one of these moments that exposes that. I think it's naive of Musk to kind of go in and think that he can just wave a wand and turn Twitter into the platform that he wants it to be, because the curation of these
okay, but that's not the criticism of Musk.
No.
Yeah.
Platforms is incredibly, incredibly complicated.
The former CEO of Reddit, Ellen Pao, recently wrote an opinion piece in the Washington Post criticizing how Musk might exercise his influence on the platform. And Musk tweeted about Jeff Bezos using his wealth to buy the Washington Post. Is this potential takeover of Twitter by Musk the same thing?
Yeah, that's a great comparison because it's just absolutely not. There's very strong kind of professionalized norms in journalism that split.
It's interesting how
professionalized norms.
Yeah, the professionalized norms is interesting, and it's remarkable how Elon Musk purchasing Twitter terrifies people.
Right.
But it only terrifies people who buy into certain ideological stances.
Right. I don't know anybody on the political right who was terrified by Elon Musk buying Twitter.
Right.
And it's not because they were hoping for hate speech. You know, what's interesting is she talks about how difficult it is to define hate speech. You can have on Twitter accounts owned by terrorist groups like Antifa where they will literally talk about the time and meeting place that they're going to meet to attack police officers. And that will be allowed. But you could have someone come on and say something like, I don't believe men can have children, and be banned, and that's considered hate speech.
Right.
And it's that ridiculous double standard that has infuriated people and pushed people to the point where they really do hope a billionaire comes in and saves the whole company because it seems rotten to the core.
Yeah, it's the new public space, you know. And again, so the examples that I were thinking of were more international examples where out and out terrorist groups that virtually everyone, independent of their
Hezbollah,
ideological leanings, would agree that
Hamas,
terrorist groups. Yeah,
the Ayatollah's Twitter account.
Exactly. The spokesman for the Taliban. Okay.
Business and editorial, and Bezos' ownership of the Washington Post has almost nothing to do with the editorial side of the content. And the other part of this is that what Musk is trying to do with Twitter is to control users' speech and individual speech. And that's not something that the Washington Post does.
Assistant law professor Kate Klonick, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
So there's so much to unpack there. But
I know.
with something like the Washington Post, it's not that simple. It's not as simple as she made it out to be. It's not just a simple case that they have the editorial page and then they have the stories that they run. It's also which stories they decide to run. There was a time when somebody on the left wrote quite well about this in Noam Chomsky when he was talking about how there's a filtering system for the stories that go up. And when you have somebody like Jeff Bezos who runs the Washington Post, it's very possible that there is a political bias that's enforced there. I don't know. That would be something I'd be interested in studying and looking at. I do know that there's a political bias on Twitter.
Yeah, and just to be clear, you mentioned Chomsky. Chomsky is an app. I wish that I miss the days of the old leftists. You know, Chomsky is a staunch advocate.
Why not interview him for this?
That would have been great. Yeah. Chomsky's a staunch advocate of free speech.
What I'm concerned about when it comes to controlling speech is our government. What I don't want to have happen is the government controlling speech. I'm not really concerned about other people in the United States controlling their speech. I'm not concerned about controlling other citizens' speech. I'm concerned about our government controlling our speech. And these people have it so backwards.
Unpack that.
When it comes to censorship, it's the government deciding what we can and can't say or what someone can or can't say that's truly dangerous because they can enforce that with violence. I'm not concerned about what some redneck or some far-left hippie three doors down says on his personal Twitter account.
Right.
If they're openly advocating for violence the way Antifa does, take them off the site. If they hold weird fringe political views, who cares? But when it comes to censorship and the First Amendment, who we really have to watch out for is the government. And I think it's somewhat ironic that in the face of this purchase by Elon Musk, the Biden solution, which has since gone down the toilet because it was such a bad idea, was a Bureau of Speech Enforcement that they were going to put forth. And it was such an insane and stupid idea that fortunately it tanked.
Yeah.
But that's what was dangerous. And I can almost guarantee you that these stand-ins for free speech advocate that they interviewed probably thought that was a great idea. Let's get a Bureau of Misinformation and get some bureaucrat decide what we can and can't say.
Right.
Thank you for joining us for our second episode of All Things Reconsidered. The best way to support us is to subscribe on YouTube and Substack. You can also get a t-shirt, tote bag, or sticker at peterboghossian.com, which are really great conversation starters. Thanks for joining us, and please always reconsider what you hear on NPR or any other news source for that matter.
This episode of All Things Reconsidered is supported by Parrhesia, freedom of speech, the act of speaking with boldness and courage. Visit peterboghossian.com to learn more.